It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Björn Stansvik, pioneer, founder, and CEO of MentorMate. Bjrn has worked in high-tech and strategic business development in Europe, Latin America, and the United States at leading companies including Procter Gamble, Ericsson, and Arthur D. Little prior to founding MentorMate in 2001. MentorMate was named a top ICT employer in Bulgaria, and the Star Tribune included MentorMate on its top 150 workplaces list. The new office at 7 offices opened in AstraZeneca's BioVenture Hub in Gothenburg, Sweden in 2016. Bjrn holds a Master's of Science in Business Administration from Gothenburg School of Economics and has completed a master's thesis in Industrial Economics at the Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg. As a recognized technology innovator, Bjrn has won numerous distinctions and is a regular speaker to business groups in entrepreneurship, technology, and management. Bjrn Stansvik, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you very much, Brant.
Oh, great to have you here today. And I guess you're up in beautiful San Francisco, or did we catch you somewhere else in the world today?
15 minutes north of San Francisco, Marin County.
Nice. Beautiful up there. I'm actually just down the coast in San Diego. I came out of the cold of the Northeast a couple of weeks ago, actually almost a month now. And it's been a smile on my face ever since. So for those that are listening that are in the cold, spring is coming, but we're both enjoying that weather today. But let's start a little bit with kind of how you're doing through the pandemic. I know that we spoke a couple of weeks back, and, obviously MentorMate's had some of the challenges that most firms have had during this period. But how have you been, your family, and your colleagues at your company?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's obviously one that's big on everyone's mind or has impacted everyone. On a personal level, It's been mixed. Distance learning has been a challenge with kids. I think that's the single biggest challenge throughout the pandemic.
Are your kids young, Bjrn?
Yeah, 4, 6, and 8.
Oh, boy. Yeah, tough haters. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's probably the prime challenge for our family.
Right.
And then, but now school has actually started again, so that's really nice. Yeah, so it's a lot better.
And I just read today in the news, I know that folks are listening to this is old news by them, but I read that I think it's Moderna that's begun testing kids between 6 months and 12 years. So they're finally going to be having some data with regards to testing vaccinated kids at that age, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually the vaccine we got as well.
Yeah.
But then, there's been a lot of positives too, from a personal standpoint, less travel, the commuting. So I commuted monthly to Minnesota, where our headquarters are. So I don't have to get on a plane as much. So that's much appreciated. And I think has been true for a lot of people who didn't really like their commutes. And then working from home, again, kids, distance learning, interruptions. I'm not alone about it. So so we're still navigating that. I have pulled the curtain now and locked the door to the home office, which is a separate building, but it's only 30 seconds from the main house, and they do know where it is.
They do know where it is. Yeah. Well, the good thing is they're back in school. And how has your staff done? Have you had any major issues with COVID? Has it been able
Sure.
to be business as usual?
Better than expected. I mean, everyone has a very personal experience, I think, and to generalize, I think extroverts have probably struggled more than introverts. Now we're in tech with, I suppose, without playing too much into stereotypes, that we have a little bit more introverts than extroverts.
Right.
So, I mean, I've been very impressed by how the staff has held up. Now, at the same time, I don't say that to minimize or be oblivious to many of the challenges and the suffering that's going on. So I want to be very careful and sensitive to recognize that. But that having been said, I'm really impressed. It's gone off or over better than expected. We have adapted, we have the virtual hangouts, the virtual happy hours.
Right.
They do get, I think after a certain amount of time, and I think many people are at that point now, they do get a little staler or older.
Yeah.
We've tried to mix it up with more interactive elements, like game show hosts and whatnot. But you can only take it so far, I think. I think we've done what we can, but I also think that a lot of people are ready to get back into the office, and I hope that's going to be the case sooner than later. We have done a number of surveys of our staff, and they've been pretty consistent in terms of how the population divides equally into about half of the people saying, good riddance to the office. I want to work from home. So that's one half. So those people, I think we're going to entice with food and, really nice rethought offices, because coming in once in a while, I think will be a positive for events and team building and so on. But we will respect and lean into the new normal of working from anywhere. But so half of the people, we're not going to see that much more in the office, I predict. The other half have said, I want to come in somewhere between 1 and 5 days a week. And it's going to vary. So it's really a spectrum. And some people just like being in the office. They are in a minority. But it's certainly a non-trivial size of that group. So it's a bit of choose your own adventure. Right.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm glad that you are getting through it. And with vaccinations now becoming more and more readily available, we'll hopefully be moving to perhaps not a new normal, but certainly a different normal. Right. I don't think everything's going to be quite the same as it once was. But glad to hear that you and your family and your colleagues are doing well. But let's get back to you. And you've got such an interesting background. You are our first Swedish-born CEO on the show. So I'm very excited about that, having lived and worked in Sweden myself many years ago. Tell us a little bit about the early years. I believe you grew up in Gothenburg, if I'm not mistaken. And what was that early family life like?
Sure. You're correct. Grew up in Gothenburg, short stints in Stockholm. That was later in life, professionally speaking. But grew up middle class. Mom's a physician, geriatrician, general practice. In Sweden, doctors don't get paid nearly as much as in America. So it was truly middle class. And my dad was a controller with the municipality, local. And he was actually, before that, he was a controller with the healthcare, I'm translating here, but healthcare authority. And he invented his 15 minutes of fame. He invented the pricing model for Swedish healthcare. So he actually hosted an American delegation that came over with the question of, how do you guys do it in Sweden for half the money with better outcomes?
Wow. Cool. Brothers and sisters?
Yep. Younger sister, 5 years younger, works for Apple, lives in Santa Cruz, just a couple hours from here. And that was probably one of the key reasons we moved here. She also has 3 young kids, similar ages, so the cousins can grow up together.
Yeah. Awesome. What were some of the things that you remember from mom and dad growing up? Culturally, things that were important that they instilled in you?
They were pretty overprotective, I would say, which I think at the time I found cloying and irritating and not very cool. But if I psychoanalyze myself, I think them being there all the time made me secure enough to actually emigrate, start a company, and so on. I just felt very safe. So I give them credit for that. And then my dad too. He actually had a big career opportunity, but in his case, he turned it down to spend more time with the family.
Oh, great. Very focused. I love that. Were you a good student in school?
Yes. Pretty much all A's all the time. It was very easy. I felt school.
Did computer science, mathematics, other sciences come easy to you early on?
You know, the odd, ironic thing running a software company is that software development was my 1C.
That's interesting. I'm sure not too many of your employees know that, so we'll have to have a restricted distribution of this.
Yeah, certainly. And I don't know. I like human languages, history, religion, the humanities a lot more.
Right.
I mean, I got A's in math and physics and science and chemistry, all of that. But when it came to programming, and we were learning Pascal, all that.
Oh my gosh! Oh yeah.
It was torture to me. It's kind of funny that I'm running a software development company, but what I love about software is the creativity, the blank canvas creativity that it allows. Right, you start with the screen, or it doesn't have to be a screen. It could be a voice recognition or whatever interface you have.
Right.
But you start with something that's really has a lot of degrees of freedom. And that's what I love about technology development.
Yeah. What about some other interests? Sports, music, debate?
Sure.
Were there other things that you got involved with as a kid?
When it comes to sport, I never really enjoyed the organized sports, if you will, but I loved nature. So hiking, kayaking, just being outdoors. Yep. Absolute mountain biking, motorcycling. All of it, can't get enough of it. But if it was soccer practice, I tried that. I played on a number of teams, but it was just
not your thing.
I don't like showing up at a certain time, or I'm more autonomous.
Right.
So let's see, what was the other question? Interest?
Yeah, just in terms of other types of things you did as a kid. Any entrepreneurial things? In the state, you typically grow up with paper routes and so forth. And you've, of course, founded your own company. Was there some early entrepreneurial learnings and leanings you had?
Sure. And to stay with the sports, my parents tried to get me into the ballet when I was 5 years old. I totally hated it and did not cooperate. So I'm not a ballet dancer. I don't think I have the talent either. But let's see here. Entrepreneurial ventures. The first one was probably an apple pie attempt. So we secured some resources from a couple of local apple trees, and I put my younger sister and her friends and my friends to work peeling and cutting apples. So we had a kind of an assembly line, if you will, of so many apples. From there on, we went to distribution, making our own signs and sitting down by the local grocery store. Sales were lackluster, to state it mildly, and we proceeded to work through word of mouth in a network of friends and family, and were eventually able to dispose of the merchandise that way.
I love it. It's terrific. What other types of jobs did I know growing up in Europe, it's a little different. You don't necessarily have the part-time jobs and so forth, but did you do any of that, or was it until college, until you started working?
Yeah. So I did a number of summer jobs, practical trainings, worked at the nursing home, feeding, caring for Alzheimer patients when I was 16, I think I was. Year prior, I was helping the janitor there repair everything that broke. And then I think
tell us a little more about that. What led you to volunteer at the Alzheimer's care?
Well, my mom was the resident physician, so she was actually running a few nursing homes, and I just asked her if I could do summer work there. I think it was just kind of a natural you go to where your parents are working, and that's where my mom happened to work. So I was there, feeding people and getting kind of a close-up view of that. And then there was a bit of course, coming from Gothenburg, you got to do a stint at Volvo. So I packaged spare parts into cardboard boxes, a lot of those. And I had a run-in with the union there, actually. The union first told me I had to join them, which I didn't want to do, but I couldn't work there otherwise. and then they told me I couldn't work more than 40 hours a week or something like that. So I got 2 time stamp sheets. So I was working 80 hours a week.
Oh my God.
With 2 of those. And then you asked about.
Now, was that during college, or it must have been during a summer or something?
Yeah, during 2 summers. It's called prep school. It's between college and high school, but around that age. I think I was 17, 18 when I did that.
Right.
And at the same time, too, I had another second entrepreneurial venture. The county where my dad worked, they were getting rid of their old computers. And I think they were selling them for between $10 and $20 a piece.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and I sensed an arbitrage opportunity, so I quickly drove over there in our Volvo 240, the square old one, and said I want to buy them all. So I bought all of them for $10 to $20 a pop, and then I was stuffing that old 240 Volvo full of old computers, and some other citizens show up and say they wanted to buy some too, and they said, well, that young man there, he just bought all of them. And they were not too happy about that, but I said, I got here first. So I refurbished all of those and had a little marketing campaign and resold them at a bit of a profit. So those are some early days.
Yeah. Well, it was probably a foregone conclusion that you go to college. I mean, it's a cultural thing, but also with both your parents being highly educated. And you went to, I think, count 4 or 5 different universities. So tell us a little bit about that path and it looks like you did some studies, of course, in the States as well as in Sweden. And, give us a little bit of background as to your choices behind your education.
Yeah, I had shifting priorities. They started out, first, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So that was the first priority. I had to figure that out. So I picked generalist types of education, business, languages. And then I was fortunate enough to land an internship, actually in San Diego, where you're at now, at the Swedish consulate downtown, close to Horton Plaza there. And I loved that internship. It was very varied, trade promotion, helping citizens in need, and So I got interested in diplomacy, the European Union, the United Nations. And studied some political science.
Did you think a diplomatic career might be in your future at one point?
Yeah, for about a year or 2 at least. I thought that was in my future. And then I was fortunate enough to land an internship with Procter Gamble in Stockholm in laundry detergents and the exciting world of value pricing.
Indeed.
Yeah, because we want to cultivate that consumer loyalty, of course. So I did that, opened up my mind to business, and I said, you know what? Diplomacy will have to wait. I'm going to get into business. And I was very focused on that for a while. And then I was fortunate to land an internship with Ericsson, a Swedish telecom strategic business development in Stockholm for their new intelligent homes initiative. And together with a friend, we wrote our master thesis project. And that was really the pivotal moment that opened up my view to technology and what you could do with that.
Yeah. And what was the first kind of full-time job you had at the end of your education? Or did you work full-time and then go back and get your master's and your MBA later?
I sprinkled lots of educational things, including management consulting and so on during my studies. And I tripled up on the student load, and just because I was able to study fast. And so I did it all kind of in one fell swoop at the same time. And then when it was time to get a real job, so to speak, I did some interviewing in Sweden in management consulting, but I really wanted to go over to the States. And I forgot to mention, I had been over there prior as an exchange student.
Oh, right.
Or I should say foreign student, because no one went in my stead. But yeah.
Right. Now, was that at the high school level, or did you do that during your college years?
College,
yeah. Cool. And it was Northern State University, I believe, right?
Correct.
Where was that? Where was that located?
In the great state of South Dakota.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. That must have been a little bit of a culture shock coming from Gothenburg.
It was. And Sweden, as you may know, having been there, is, I think, by many measures, the most secular country in the world. And I ended up in a Mormon or Mennonite host family.
State. Yeah.
And
wow. Did you live with a Mennonite family?
Yeah. I did. They came from Mennonites. I wasn't. So we visited Mennonite colonies, but I didn't live in one. But they were highly religious, and I was not. So that made for an exchange of ideas, you could call it.
Yeah, terrific. And how long were you there?
1 year.
1 year, awesome.
Did a lot of traveling during that time too, across the country, including a 33-day trip in a 1918 Chevy Citation that kept breaking down across the western United States.
That's great.
And that was actually what attracted me to America, that trip when the car kept breaking down, because I had to rely on the kindness of strangers, and especially outside of the big cities. The Americans that I came across were incredibly kind and generous in helping us keep our journey going.
That's good to hear. Did you do that with some other Swedish friends that came over, or some American friends you met?
It was actually with a girlfriend from Chile, so the two of us.
Chile. Oh, wow. Yeah. Great combination. Awesome. So back to the first job. Now, was that with Hunt Technologies, or was there another kind of full-time after education job you started?
Nope, you got it. And that one started in a very, very convoluted way, but ultimately one that really shaped my time here in the United States in many ways. So when I decided to go to America, I had a little bit of a challenge in the sense that I didn't have a work permit or a sponsor or any connections or any money or anything of that sort. So I started by asking Ericsson, who knew me, hey, can you transfer me to the States? And they said, no, we got a job for you in Germany, Sweden, or Norway. You can pick any of those three. And I said, I'm not interested. I want to go to America. So I said goodbye, got a couple of suitcases and got on a plane and went to Minneapolis, where Minnesota's a big Swedish community there. Unfortunately, I was detained in immigration, and unfortunately, I had a big stack of resumes printed in my suitcase.
Oh, a little obvious what you were doing there.
Yeah, it didn't go over that well for some reason. So I was put in this little cell where they started interrogating me, asking what my intentions were and so on. And I said, well, my intentions are to look for a job, but not to accept one until I have secured the proper work permit.
Right.
So kind of talking through those points was a little bit dicey, but in the end, they ended up believing me and let me through. But I was very, very careful then with all prospective employers to disclose very quickly that I didn't have a work permit, which unfortunately made the job interviews very short, where they said, well, then you can't work here. The door is there. So I did that about 150 times over the course of maybe 80 days. And you have 90 days, as you may know, on the visa waiver.
That's right. Yeah.
So with 10, or it might have been 20 days to spare, I was pretty desperate and made a last-ditch attempt with my ethnic community, the Swedish community in Minnesota, through the institute there. And I was introduced through my friend Eric Lindberg to them. And there was a man there by the name of Anders Rudåker, who was the CEO of St. Paul District Energy. And he was also from Sweden, but had been there for...
Sounds like it.
I just want to make sure everyone knew. He had been there 30 years, and he said, my attorney's son works at a high-tech company called Hunt Technologies up in Pequot Lakes, 3 hours north of the Twin Cities, and they're looking for people. Maybe you ought to talk to them.
Wow.
So I did, and I knew this was my last best chance, so I had prepared a whole presentation, SWOT analysis, and
you had 180 rejections prior to that, right?
Yeah, I was just not going to let them reject me. So when they started interviewing me, I said, I'm sorry, but you have to hold your questions. I will now proceed to tell you what to do with your company.
Wow.
And then I went on to with all the humility of a 25-year-old, tell them what they should do with their business.
Oh my goodness.
And when I was done, they asked me when I could start. And I said, well,
One small issue.
Yeah, one small issue, this work permit thing. And they said, well, we're this small company from Minnesota. We don't know this foreign stuff. So you seem like, a nice enough guy, but we just don't want that complication. So see you later. We'll hire an American. So my heart sank quite a bit and my desperation level spiked. And I had done some business intelligence gathering, knowing that they wanted, for some odd reason, to expand to El Salvador. And I didn't think it was really the key target they should be marketing, but that's what they wanted to do. So I went back to where I was staying, and in 4 days, I had written an 80-page market entry strategy report for automatic meter reading equipment, which is what they were doing for the El Salvadoran market. And I FedExed that to them, calling them as soon as I saw it was delivered, asking if they liked my report, to which they responded, we didn't ask for you to write a report. To which I responded, well, that's my gift for you. And by the way, I'm coming up tomorrow for new employee orientation. To which they responded, you're not hired. I said, I know that. That's just the detail. But in light of, having spent this time writing this report, if you could just humor me and let me learn a little bit more about your company, which is very fascinating to me, I would be very grateful. And they relented and said, okay, you can do that, but you're not hired. You don't work here, just so we're clear. I said, okay. So then I went through new employee orientation. And after that, I told them I wanted a desk and a computer. And they looked at me a little funny and said, Bjorn, you seem a little slow. What part of not being hired don't you get? And I said, no, don't worry about it. I'm just going to volunteer here. You don't pay me. And to volunteer, you don't need a work permit, I told them.
That's right. Absolutely.
Actually, I've later learned it's incorrect. Oh. You actually do once. I don't want listeners to think this, but I was honestly ignorant of that detail, and they were too. And it seemed reasonable enough. So they let me into the building, which was, their mistake. And pretty soon, I just walked into, as soon as I saw a meeting, I would just walk in and sit down quietly until I got smart. Then I raised my hand and volunteered to do the work. So within a week or so, I was integrated in every major project in the company. Wow. And then I approached them.
Did they implement your El Salvadorian project?
Yeah. And I'll tell you in a minute what happened with that. But after those 1 or 2 weeks there, I approached them again and I said, look, here's what's going to happen. You are going to sponsor me, but I do need to go back to Sweden to do things legally. So I, will work globally for you until you secure a work permit for me, and then I'll come back and then I'll help you globalize your company. And they said, you know what? We like your approach. We'll go ahead and sponsor you.
Wow. Fantastic. Well, perseverance, it sounds like, is a key word there. Huh?
Yeah. And one of the things, and it took the INS, as it was called then, 8-9 months to figure out that they should approve the application. Now there's expedited processing, and all of that didn't exist when I did it. Anyways, one of the missions I was on then was to El Salvador. So I did go over there, and that's a whole different story. What happened then?
Running. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing. What a terrific story. And then shortly thereafter, you got into the learning management systems business. Now, tell us a little bit how that started.
Yeah, so I was trying to impress a girl I was dating by learning Chinese, and I wasn't really doing that well with the language learning part of it. But I started thinking, I've always been fascinated how we can learn things quicker. So I read up on that, and then I really realized two things. One was that your learning resource had to be with you at all times. So hence mobile computing. And those were the days of the Palm Pilot, which I erroneously thought was the iPhone, but it wasn't quite there. But I thought it was. And the second notion,
most people did, to your defense.
I try. I shouldn't be that critical of myself. But at any rate, the other notion was the cognitive, real-time right-sizing of the educational challenge via a formative, adaptive assessment methodology that essentially aimed to keep you in the flow state of mind at all times. So to put it differently, you don't want things to be too easy. Then you get bored. You're not really exercising your brain. You don't want them to be too hard because now you're just stuck, right? So you want to be able to sense in real time what's your level of mastery or proficiency with a particular fact element. And that's where I invented what's now an issued U.S. patent on that. And it's called adaptive formative assessment. Assessments, both long and short answer questions. So anyway, so I thought that constituted together mobility plus that educational approach was a better mousetrap. So I went out and raised about $1.5 million in cash and services on evenings and weekends during the dot-com bust and winter, which was one of the hardest things I ever did. I think it took me 3 years to do that race. But I garnered enough money to feel secure in starting it and risk losing the first work permit I had. So I came to a more precarious status that way, but left that job with Hunt Technologies after having served 2 years there and got going on this, only then to learn that no one really wanted to pay for it, but it took me about 4 or 5 years to realize that.
Right. So did you start managing people then in the startup, or did you have people responsibilities while you were still at Hunt?
Let's see. At Hunt, I worked in a lot of product teams. So I'm trying to remember now. I don't think I had direct reports really. It was more
leadership experience.
Yeah, leadership experience, but not so much management experience.
So when was the first time you started managing?
It was 2001, and it was high school students.
Right.
So because
they're cheap and available.
and they also happened to be the guinea pigs for the educational content because I focused on advanced placement. So we had AP US history and so on. And actually, one of them in particular, Stephen, he volunteered to be to organize focus groups to design the user interface for the Palm Pilot apps and so on. And pretty soon he and a few others, they were regulars and they thought it was fun building software and so on. So that's how it all began. And he became a very important part of the company over the years. And I think he's now working for Google.
Well trained.
I'd like to think so.
So 20 years later, in fact, I think your anniversary is this month, is it not? Wasn't the company founded in March of 2001?
That is so funny. I should have thought of that. You are. It's today. It's today, actually, March 16th. It's
today.
It is today. It's literally today.
Wow, March 16th. Wow. Well, that was actually predisposed. I think we predestined for us to do that. Well, congratulations on that, and close to 600 employees now.
Yeah, closer to 700. It's been. I say it's almost like a real company now. And then my leaders correct me and say we're not even a small company. We're actually a medium-sized company now, Bjrn.
That's right.
And I think
part of the middle market.
I think they're right.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, tell us a little bit about kind of some leadership reflection, starting from those first high school students you managed to now a very large organization. What are some of the key leadership lessons you've learned over the last 20 years?
So the first one that comes to mind is adapting the techniques to the person in question, right? Sounds like an obvious thing, but
no cookie cutters.
No. So having started with high school students, you may call some of the management micromanagement. I was paying them in chicken McNuggets and McDonald's French fries to start.
I imagine. A few Coca-Colas every now and then.
No, literally. Then, but once I saw the capabilities, so for instance, with Stephen, then I started letting go more and more. So I was very, very hands-on in the beginning, perhaps too much so for some people's liking. But then when I saw them take on more responsibility, I let go of that. And then as we started growing, I may have over delegated as well, but it goes to the other extreme of when you're working with highly capable people. I see the role more as being an intellectual sparring partner, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where we're only the management style I have is not by consensus, but it's very consultative. And it's the rare exception that I would overrule or override our leaders, because quite frankly, they know their jobs better than I do.
Right.
Sometimes I'll have a different opinion, but that's the exception. So I think we have check your ego at the door, high autonomy with high expectations. And there's a lot of urgency and impatience. It's not for everyone. In the early days, there was more sink or swim. It didn't suit everyone. Now we have more systems and so on. And with greater size comes greater specialization. So swim lanes get more and more defined, which I think makes it a little easier on people in general. In the early days, we needed more Mustangs, so to speak, or mutants, or whatever you want to call them, people who can do a lot of different things. And sometimes you and I have been guilty of it, assuming that people know what you know and that it all should be obvious, right? So making that explicit, being systematic without being over-engineered, and always striving for that balance of agility versus structure, and honing and dialing in on that based on the feedback you get. So being a really good listener and reading the signals, because a lot of the most important signals you get as a leader are very quiet. They're not the loudest ones.
Yeah,
so you really got to think about, and whether it's body language, whether it's a research report, whether it's a trend. I mean, you got to be an extremely good listener to make predictions that are more right than wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what would you say is most unique or perhaps unusual about your company culture, Bjorn?
So it's funny to get that question today as opposed to a week ago. And I say that because I just had this interesting meeting with our VP of Design, Danny Royal. And sometimes when you build a company from the ground up, you think, well, this is just the normal way. Why doesn't everyone do it this way, right?
Right.
But he said, no, it's actually really different, and he calls it different by design. And now I'm spilling some beans. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but so we are extremely transparent. We do a lot of offshore work, but we put it in Bulgaria, and we put the Bulgarians directly in touch with our clients. We don't hide anything. Wow. We give full transparency to clients. So it's just super open. That's one thing. They start their workday at noon in Bulgaria, giving us a 4-hour overlap with the Midwest, a 2-hour with the West Coast, and a 5-hour overlap with the East Coast for that synchronous collaboration. Right. And then they end at 8 p.m. their time. And then the culture of openness, and I mentioned, high autonomy, high expectations. There's just a number of elements in how the company has been built up that just kind of made sense to us when we did it, but that have formed a different DNA, if you will.
Right. What do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in and hire, Bjorn?
I look for the ability to plug a hole that we have or conquer new ground that we've been unable to conquer in the past. So, and those can get somewhat difficult to discern. Some of them are very textbooky and kind of easy to rattle off, marketing or operations, and you plug it in there. But then there's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 layers of the onion below that where you look for what aspect of operations are we missing? What aspect of marketing are we missing in the current mix that we have? Or what's a totally new or different way of thinking about how do we grow up as a company? What's the journey ahead? What's a function that doesn't really exist? Or what's the sense making that we need to do as a company to stay relevant? So we're just making a big bet in that area by welcoming back someone who used to work with us, Craig, who went to a bigger company, worked there for a while, and then made the determination he wanted to come back, and we welcomed him back to help us lead growth. So he's joining here in a couple of weeks.
Nice. How do you personally interview? What kind of questions do you like to ask to kind of get at that, that onions, those layers of onions, so to speak?
I like stories, case studies. I prefer not to talk in generalities, but deduce generalities from specifics rather than the other way around. Because I think that it's not very telling to ask someone about generalities. But if you ask them about a story or how they solved something, and you keep probing and interviewing them, you can deduce what skills or what insights did they actually demonstrate in that. And for some reason, it makes me think of my interviewing when I was at the Swedish consulate in San Diego, where we interviewed people who wanted to become Swedish citizens or get a Swedish green card and so on, usually as two spouses, right? And we wanted to make sure it wasn't sham marriages and so on. So we would separate them into two rooms and then interview and drill down in some aspect of their story. What was the color of the hotel room? You first, and then you go into the other room and you'd ask the same. Well, what was the color of that hotel room?
What did you do this weekend?
Honestly, these days with the team, I rely a lot on the team in terms of sussing those things out.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we've almost out of time, but you've been very, very gracious with telling us your stories. I really enjoy the hunt technology stories. If that doesn't say perseverance, I don't know what does. But we always ask one last question, and I know what's going to be at the top of this, but I'd love to hear more of that. What kind of career and life advice would you give to someone who, maybe has their eyes on the corner office or perhaps wants to be an entrepreneur like yourself, looking at maybe early on in their career, they've got a great idea and they want to pursue it and make it big?
My first advice is kind of a non-advice, because I believe in something called a Gestalt protocol, where it's a bit presumptuous to give advice to someone you don't know because you don't know their character or their priorities. But rather, I would say listen to stories, whether it's mine or others, read biographies, and see what resonates with your core. So I would look for resonance, personal resonance, as you're exposed. I would start with expose yourself to lots of different life stories and trajectories, see what resonates with you. And that resonance, I think, will then lead to inspiration, what you should pursue. But you should find that within yourself rather than me telling you.
Yeah. Is that how you stumbled on the learning direction? Was there something at Hunt that you learned that kind of led you down that path?
Yes and no. So it was something that resonated within me. I don't know if it was at Hunt that I stumbled across it, but I was always fascinated by how do we make our brains go faster or so on, because we live in a way in our heads, right? And how can you make your head work better, so to speak? So that's been a lifelong fascination of mine. And then I love the mobile gadgets. Even before the Palm Pilot was that Casio, and I tried to just optimize my productivity with these little organizers, and I had all kinds of systems for it. So those passions had been with me and were persistent. And then they found an expression that in a way blossomed, if you will, into an innovation that was too early for its time. It ended up actually as a sidetrack. That became a different company 7 years down the line when Medtronic reached out and wanted something similar on iPads. They had somehow heard of me. So I started a new company that way, but that's a different story.
Yeah. Well, Björn Stansvik, CEO and founder of MentorMate, thank you so very much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Bjrn, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.